The Iron Blood Citadel was the largest structure in the known world. Its walls were 40 feet of black granite quarried from the Spine Mountains, its towers so tall their spires disappeared into the clouds on foggy mornings. The great gates were reinforced iron, each one weighing 30 tons, etched with the crest of House Valerias, a black wolf devouring a crescent moon. It had stood for 600 years. It had repelled invasions, survived earthquakes, and outlasted 4 dynasties. It had never, in all its centuries, hosted anything quite like 3 10-year-old boys who treated its labyrinthine corridors as a hunting ground. The first servant who saw them called it a haunting. The second called it a siege. The third, a grizzled kitchen woman named Betta who had worked in the citadel for 40 years and feared nothing. Not the king's temper, not the winter floods, not the rats that plagued the lower cellars, saw the smallest boy crouched on top of the wardrobe at the end of the east corridor, grinning at her with teeth that were not entirely human, and she quit on the spot. The boys had been inside the citadel for exactly 6 hours. Outside the walls, in a sprawling camp of black tents and smoking fire pits, Lyra sat sharpening her spear and pretending she didn't care. She cared. She cared so much it felt like swallowing glass. The alliance had been signed 3 years ago in the fog of the Savage Lands. The insurrection in the south had been crushed in 11 days. 11 days that had become legend in every tavern from the capital to the coast. People said the Ghost Alpha's shadow wolves had moved through the rebel ranks like smoke through a keyhole. People said the 3 boy generals had coordinated the flanking maneuver that broke the enemy's center with a precision that left seasoned commanders weeping with professional envy. What people didn't say, what they whispered only behind closed doors with candles low and voices lower, was that the middle boy, the big one, the quiet one, had opened his mouth at the siege of Fort Ashen, and the eastern wall had simply fallen down. Nobody wanted to put that in the official dispatches. The kingdom was saved, the throne was secure, and Alpha King Cade Valerius had stood before his full court, before the dukes and the lords and the high priests and the ambassadors of 7 foreign nations, and had formally named Jet, Khan, and Rix as his heirs, the princes of the Iron Blood, triad of the Valeria's line, inheritors of a throne they had never asked for. The boys had not been present for the ceremony. They were in the forest outside the citadel walls, hunting a boar. They caught it too. It was Mara's formal exile that finally broke the political deadlock. Without her father's gold backing her position, stripped of her title by royal decree, House Vane had quietly folded. Duke Vane had written a groveling letter of apology and offered his youngest son as a ward of the court to demonstrate loyalty. Cade had accepted the ward and used the Vane family's own banks to fund the citadel's expansion. A quiet, devastating power move that earned him a grudging new respect from the council, but none of that filled the hollow in his chest. None of that brought Lyra inside the walls. For 3 years, the camp had remained. For 3 years, Lyra had held to the terms. An alliance, a partnership, nothing more. She ate outside. She slept outside. She trained her shadow wolves in the killing fields north of the citadel at dawn. And by midday she was gone, back to the Savage Lands to manage her territory, returning only when the kingdom's needs demanded it. The boys were the variable she hadn't accounted for. Children, it turned out, did not respect the terms of political arrangements. It had started small. Jet had asked, with devastating reasonableness, why he could not attend the War Council. He was a tactical commander. The War Council discussed tactics. The logic was airtight. Lyra had said no. Jet had said acknowledged, in the tone that meant he was already planning around the objection. 2 weeks later, General Thorne had mentioned, with carefully averted eyes, that the middle prince had taken to sitting outside the War Council chamber, and that his hearing was exceptional. Khan had started disappearing for hours at a time, and when Lyra sent scouts to find him, they had found him in the stables, sitting in total silence beside an old beta named Gareth, who was missing 2 fingers and 1 eye, and apparently had no reaction whatsoever to a 10-year-old who occasionally made the ground tremble. Rix had made friends. This was the most alarming development. Rix, the wild card, the boy who was more wolf than human on most days. who had once chased a fully armored knight up a tree for the entertainment of watching him climb. Rix had made friends with the king's ward, young Felix Vane, a 12-year-old who was small and bookish and terrified of everything, and yet somehow had taken to following Rix around with a look of pure, horrified delight. One by one the citadel was pulling her sons in. And so, on a gray Tuesday morning in the third autumn since the alliance, Lyra had packed a single bag, walked through the great iron gates, and announced to the steward that she required 3 rooms near the east tower. Not for herself, she clarified, for the princes. She took a room in the east tower, too. But only because the alternative was allowing the citadel to swallow her sons without her being there to pull them back out if it became necessary. This was purely strategic. She told herself this firmly, every morning, while ignoring the fact that her window faced the courtyard where Cade trained at dawn. The War Council chamber smelled of old parchment, candle wax, and the specific anxiety of men who were accustomed to being the smartest people in the room and were no longer certain this was true. Jet sat at the far end of the long oak table in the chair that had been placed there for him, not voluntarily, but because the alternative was him standing in the doorway, which had proven to be more unnerving than giving him a seat. He was small for the chair. His feet didn't quite touch the floor. He had a cup of black tea that he did not drink, and a map that he had already memorized. Lord Castellan Drevin was speaking. He was always speaking. He had a voice like the crackling of old parchment, dry and thorough and impossible to ignore, and he had been speaking in that voice to kings and councils for 40 years, long enough that the habit of command had calcified into something that no longer required effort. He spoke, and men listened, and that was simply the order of things. Jet was listening. He had been listening for 3 weeks. He was no longer just listening to what Drevin said. He was listening to what Drevin chose not to say. The border garrison at Nightwatch reports continued instability, Drevin was intoning, his stylus moving across the dispatch scroll. Rogue incursion rates are up 14% since the summer solstice. I recommend increasing the garrison force by 200 men. Jet set down his tea. Everyone at the table looked at him. This was new. In 3 weeks, he had not said a single word during council. The incursion rate increase correlates with the drought in the Greymarch territory, Jet said. His voice was still young, still high, but the cadence was not. It was the measured, unhurried cadence of someone who had thought about what he was going to say long before he said it. Rogues aren't raiding for territory. They're raiding for food. Adding soldiers creates a harder target, but it doesn't solve the food problem. The raids will escalate. Silence. General Thorne looked at the boy, then at the dispatch, then at the boy again. "What do you recommend?" Cade asked. His voice was carefully neutral. He had learned in 3 weeks that the worst thing he could do was show enthusiasm. Enthusiasm made Jet shut down. Jet didn't want approval. He wanted engagement. Is divert 15% of the garrison budget to emergency grain supply in the Greymarch border towns. The rogues raiding are mostly displaced pack wolves, families, not warriors. Give them a reason not to cross the border. Jet paused. It's cheaper than 200 soldiers, and it doesn't create a military escalation that could destabilize the entire northern corridor. Drevin smiled. It was a thin, controlled smile, the smile of a man filing information away. An interesting perspective from our young prince, Drevin said smoothly. Though one might argue that rewarding rogue incursion with food aid creates a dangerous precedent. It signals weakness. Jet looked at Drevin for a long moment. Lord Castellan, he said, how much did the last military escalation in the northern corridor cost the kingdom? Drevin blinked. That's 42,000 gold marks. I read the treasury records last week. Feeding the Greymarch border towns for a full year cost 900 gold marks. Jet picked up his tea. Weakness is a perspective. Bankruptcy is a number. He took a sip. The table was so quiet they could hear the candles burning. Later, walking back through the corridor, Jet stopped at a window that looked out over the training yard. His father was down there, sparring with Thorne, moving with the fluid power of a man who had been fighting since he could walk. Jet watched him for a long time. He had analyzed Cade's decision 7 years ago. He had run the variables. A young king, politically vulnerable, presented with what appeared to be incontrovertible evidence of his mate's treachery, surrounded by advisers who stood to benefit from the exile, that acting under pressure with imperfect information. It was not an irrational decision. It was the wrong one. Jet understood, with the cold precision of a strategist, how a man could make the wrong decision rationally. He understood it so well it made him feel sick. He kept that to himself. He kept it so deep and so quiet that on most days he could pretend it wasn't there, the terrible, traitorous understanding growing in the center of his chest like a seed cracking open in frozen ground. He turned away from the window and walked back to his room. He did not run the variables on what it would mean if he let himself forgive his father. He was not ready to know the answer. Gareth had been the Citadel's stable master for 23 years. He had worked with war horses, hunting horses, ceremonial horses, and one unforgettable occasion, a donkey that the previous king had inexplicably awarded a military commission. He had been bitten, kicked, thrown, stepped on, and once memorably sat on. He had never been sat on by a child. The first time the big boy had come to the stables, Gareth had seen him standing at the entrance, studying the space with those uncanny gold eyes, and had simply said, "If you're going to be here, you can muck out the far stall." The boy had looked at him for a long time. Then he had picked up a shovel. He hadn't said a word for 4 visits. On the 5th visit, while Gareth was treating a mare's sprained tendon, the boy had crouched down next to him, watched his hands, and said, "You're applying too much pressure on the medial side." Gareth had looked at him. The boy had shrugged. "In the savage lands, we couldn't afford a horse to go lame. And Mother taught us field medicine." "Your mother sounds like a practical woman," Gareth had said. "She's the most practical person alive," Khan said. It wasn't a boast. It was just a fact, stated with the simple certainty of a boy who had been raised by the evidence. They had worked in companionable silence after that, and when the session was done, Gareth had handed the boy a cloth to clean his hands, and the boy had taken it, and something in the transaction, the normalcy of it, the complete absence of reverence or terror, had made Khan come back the next morning, and the morning after that. The problem was not the horses. The problem was what happened when Khan forgot to hold himself together. It started small. The water trough vibrating when he was tired, the stall door swinging open without being touched when he was frustrated. Gareth noticed immediately. He noticed everything. You had to, with horses. But he said nothing for 2 weeks. He simply began placing a large stone in the center of the stable floor before Khan arrived. "What's that for?" Khan asked on the 3rd morning of finding it. "Anchor," Gareth said. Khan looked at it. "You know. I know the ground shakes sometimes. I know the horses don't spook because whatever it is, it's not threatening them." Gareth glanced sideways at the boy. "I also know you look like a man trying to hold a river in his hands." Khan sat down on a hay bale. He was 10 years old, and he sat with the exhaustion of someone 3 times that age. "It's getting bigger," he said. "The sound. When I was 7, I stopped 50 horses. Last month, I dropped my cup at breakfast, and the entire east wing lost its window glass." Gareth was quiet for a moment. "Scared?" "I am never scared," Khan said reflexively. "That's interesting," Gareth said, "because the ground's been trembling for the past 5 minutes. Khan looked down at his hands. The stone on the floor was vibrating in tiny concentric circles. He breathed out slowly. The trembling stopped. "Anchor," Gareth repeated. "Find one. Something outside yourself, a sound, a smell, a weight, something that reminds you that the world is still here." After that, Khan started bringing a piece of black river stone in his pocket, a smooth flat disc he had carried from the savage lands, worn by years of river water. He would hold it when the pressure built, pressing his thumb against its cold surface, and breathe. It helped, not completely, but enough. What nobody knew, what Khan had not told his mother, not told Jet, not told anyone, was that the power wasn't just getting bigger. It was changing. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was something underneath the sound, a pressure that moved through the earth itself, that could feel the shape of things before they happened, that hummed in the bones of the citadel like a second pulse. He could feel Lyra's heartbeat through the walls. He could feel his father's. They beat in different rhythms, his mother's controlled and measured, his father's jagged and too fast whenever Lyra was nearby. He pressed his thumb against the stone and kept this information to himself. Some things, he was learning, you held for a while before you gave them away. Felix Vane was afraid of dogs, large open spaces, crowds, the dark sudden noises. He is the sound of shouting, horses, spiders, and, this one was more philosophical, the concept of infinity. He was not afraid of Rix. This fact baffled everyone who observed it, including Rix himself, who had spent the first week of their acquaintance doing increasingly alarming things to test the theory. He had dropped from a height of 15 feet directly in front of Felix while the boy was reading. Felix had said, "Oh," and gone back to his book. Rix had shifted to half-wolf form at dinner. Felix had looked up, said, "Your table manners are actually better in that form," and offered him a bread roll. Rix had chased 3 senior advisors through the courtyard, howling in a register that made dogs faint. Felix had watched from a window, munching an apple. Rix had said, "You're going to pull something if you keep overextending your shoulder like that. You're supposed to be scared," Rix told him on the 4th day. "Of you specifically, or of scary things in general?" Felix asked. "Me specifically. Everyone is scared of me." "I'm scared of infinity," Felix said. "You're finite. I can see all of you at once. That's comforting." Rix had stared at him for a long time. Then he had sat down next to him and stolen a section of his orange. It was the beginning of something that neither of them had a word for, coming from such opposite directions of the human experience. Felix was 12 and had been afraid of his own house. His father's controlled silences, his mother's brittle cheerfulness, the way wealth and status could coat everything in gold and still leave it rotten underneath. He had arrived at the Citadel as a ward with a single trunk and the look of a boy who expected to be weaponized. Rix was 10 and had never been afraid of anything except in the very early hours of the night, something he didn't have a name for, a hollow sound in the back of his mind that arrived when he was still. He had grown up filling the stillness with noise, with movement, with mayhem. You couldn't hear the hollow sound if you were always running. They didn't talk about any of this. They talked about everything else. Felix talked about books. He had read everything in the Citadel's modest library and had opinions about all of it. Sharp and unexpected opinions delivered in the dry, quiet tone of a boy who had spent too much time alone with too many ideas. Rix talked about the savage lands, the way the fog moved, the way the pack communicated through scent and pressure, and the subtle language of ears and tails, the time his mother had tracked a rogue scout for 3 days through a blizzard and brought him back alive because she needed information, and dead men didn't talk. "Your mother sounds terrifying," Felix said. "She's the best person alive," Rix said. It came out different from how Khan had said it about Lyra. Where Khan had stated a fact, Rix said it with a fierce protectiveness that sat close to the surface and didn't apologize for itself. Felix was quiet for a moment. "What about your father?" Rix didn't answer for a long time. They were sitting on the roof of the eastern tower, which they had climbed because Rix had wanted to, and Felix had followed him with the resigned courage of someone who had decided that fear of heights was less frightening than being left alone. The citadel spread below them, the courtyards and training grounds, and the distant black ribbon of the river. In the training yard, Cade was moving through a weapons drill, alone, the way he often was in the late afternoon. He moved beautifully, Rix thought, the way a blade moved, efficient and purposeful, and with a weight behind every motion that spoke of years of absolute commitment. "I don't know," Rix said finally. "He's not what I thought he was. He tries. He's always trying." He picked at the stone under his hands. "I don't know what to do with that." "What did you think he was?" Felix asked. Rix was quiet again. Then, "Someone who made a mistake," That's what Jet says, a bad mistake, the worst kind, but still just a mistake. But Mother cried. The words came out flat and hard like stones dropped on tile. I've seen her bleed. I've seen her fight things that would stop your heart. She never made a sound. But the first night we slept inside the Citadel walls, I heard her crying through the stone. His golden eyes were fixed on the training yard below. I don't know what to do with that either. Felix didn't say anything. He was learning, slowly, the difference between things that needed a response and things that needed a witness. He sat next to Rix on the cold stone and watched the king train alone in the failing light until the courtyard was too dark to see. Rix pressed his shoulder against Felix's. Neither of them moved. High Chancellor Drevin had served 4 kings. He had survived them all by applying a single principle, consistent and unerring across 4 decades of palace politics. Never move against strength. Wait until strength becomes overconfidence. Then introduce a question, not an accusation, not a confrontation, a question. Questions were civilized, questions were legal, questions left no fingerprints. He had been watching the triplets for 3 months, and he had found his question. He brought it to the full council on a frost-sharp morning in late autumn, wrapped in the language of administrative concern. The matter of formal succession documentation, he began, setting a scroll on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man who had already won an argument before anyone else knew it had started. His Majesty's formal declaration of the princes as heirs is, of course, a matter of record. However, legal counsel has raised a point that must be addressed. He let the silence breathe for exactly the right amount of time. Under the Blood Succession Act of the 412th year, the foundational document of Iron Blood succession law, heirs of the body must be, quote, born within the recognized territorial boundaries of the kingdom, registered with the pack elder of the ruling bloodline within 30 days of birth, and acknowledged before the assembled court by the bonded mate of the reigning alpha. He closed the scroll. The princes satisfied none of these 3 conditions. The council erupted. Cade's amber eyes had gone absolutely flat. Drevin waited, patient as stone. They are my blood, Cade said. His voice so controlled it was more frightening than shouting. That has been confirmed by 3 separate physicians. Unquestionably, Drevin agreed. The biological question is settled. The legal question is not. Without formal registration, which would require, at minimum, the witnessed acknowledgement of their mother as the bonded mate of the Alpha King, the princes exist in a legal gray zone. Their claim to the succession could be challenged by any noble house with the documentation and the ambition. He smiled gently. I raise this not as an objection, but as a warning. Someone will raise this challenge eventually. It would be prudent to address the procedural gap before an enemy does. He knew, as he sat back, that he had lit a very precise fire. Not a fire that would destroy the triad directly. They were 10 years old and had stopped cavalry. That avenue was closed. But a fire that would force a conversation. Force Cade to ask Lyra to formally acknowledge the bond. Force her to either step inside the walls permanently or refuse and leave her son's claim unprotected. A question. He was very good at questions. What Drevin had not accounted for, because he had never in 40 years of palace politics encountered anything quite like it, was that the princes were already in the building. Jet had been outside the chamber door. He had, of course, heard everything. Jet came to her at dusk, which was itself unusual. The boys knew she trained at dusk. They didn't interrupt training unless there was blood. She lowered her spear when she saw his face. Jet did not have an expressive face. It was a fact she had come to terms with early, when he was 3 years old and had watched his first hunt with the same analytical calm other toddlers reserved for watching dogs play. He processed everything inward. He filed. He calculated. He only showed his face to people he had decided deserved it. Right now, his face was showing her something she hadn't seen in years. He was worried. She sat down on the training post and patted the space beside her. He sat and told her everything Drevin had said, verbatim, with no editorializing. When he was finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's not wrong about the law, Jet said. I know. If a noble house challenges the succession before we address the documentation, it goes to the High Tribunal. It could take years. During that time, Rix and Khan and I are legally in limbo. We can't vote on council matters. We can't command troops under the Iron Blood banner. We can't even... He paused, and she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, the part he was deciding whether to say out loud. We can't inherit if something happens to him. Lyra said nothing. I'm not asking you to take him back, Jet said. He said it the way he said everything difficult, directly, without softening. I'm asking you to consider whether the position you've held for 3 years is still serving its original function, or whether it's become... A long pause. Structural. Lyra stared at her son. Structural, she repeated. A wall built to protect against a specific threat. The threat was him hurting you again. But he's been... Jet stopped. Started again. He's been consistent, Mother, for 3 years. And I have been watching very carefully. The weight of that sentence fell between them. Jet watching very carefully was not a casual observation. Jet watching very carefully was a 3-year longitudinal study conducted by the most rigorous analytical mind she had ever encountered in a 10-year-old's body. You've been analyzing your father, Lyra said. I analyze everyone, Jet said. But yes, specifically him. And? Jet was quiet for longer than usual. When he spoke, it was with the careful cadence of someone delivering a verdict they hadn't wanted to reach. He is not the same man who exiled you. I don't say that to excuse what he did. I say it as a statement of observable fact. His decisions since the alliance have been different. He consulted the Shadow Pack before the winter patrols. He funded the Grey March grain supply after I raised it, and he did it without making it a public gesture. He's been in the archives twice this week reading about the Triad bloodlines. Jet folded his hands in his lap. He's trying to understand us, not to use us, just to understand. Lyra felt the crack running through the center of her chest open a little wider. She had spent 3 years maintaining the wall. She had constructed it carefully, brick by brick, from the night she had clawed her way out of the cave in the Savage Lands with 3 newborns and nothing else, telling herself that every choice she made from that moment forward was for them. Only for them. But the wall was cold, and she was so tired of cold. What do you want me to do, Jet? She asked quietly. Her son looked at her with his father's eyes. I want you to stop protecting me from something that isn't a threat anymore, he said. And I want you to let yourself have the thing you want, even if it's terrifying, even if it might hurt. He stood up, brushing hay from his trousers with the dignity of a head of state. I've run the numbers. The probability of you being happy exists. It's not 0. He walked back to the Citadel. Lyra sat in the training yard alone in the dark for a long time. Then she went and found Cade. He was in the small study off the library, the one that faced north, surrounded by open books. Triad bloodline records, pregnancy journals from the historical archive, a worn medical text on early alpha manifestation, a child's drawing, rough, done in charcoal on parchment, that she recognized as Rix's, depicting a wolf pack in formation that someone had clearly left somewhere Cade could find it. He was reading with the focused desperation of a man trying to learn in 3 years what he had missed in 7. He heard her before she knocked. He always heard her. The bond made sure of that. He looked up, and she saw, clearly and without ambiguity, what 3 years of proximity and denial had done to him. The lines around his amber eyes, the way he held himself when she was in the room, very still, the way you held yourself when something you loved was close enough to touch, and you had been told, explicitly and legally, not to touch it. She had done that to him. She had also had a very good reason. Drevin's legal question, she said without preamble. I'll handle it, Cade said immediately. I'll find another way. I won't. I know you'll handle it, she said. That's not why I'm here. She sat down in the chair across from him. The lamp between them threw warm light across the stacks of books, and she thought, unwillingly, that it looked like what she had imagined their life might look like, once before. Two people in a warm room with books and fire and the weight of the world outside the window and not inside. "Why are you here?" Cade asked. His voice was careful. He had spent 3 years being so careful, so deliberate, never pushing, never claiming, never once using the bond or the title or the history as leverage. It had cost him enormously. She could see exactly how much it had cost him. "Jet told me he's been watching you," she said. Cade closed his eyes for just a second. "I know. I've noticed. He says you're not the same man." "I'm not. He's very rarely wrong about people." "I know that too." Silence settled between them, not the icy silence of the savage lands, but something warmer and more dangerous. The silence of two people who had said everything there was to say at maximum volume and were now in the quiet place after the storm, where different things were possible. "I am still angry with you," Lyra said. "You should be. I am angry with you in a way that I don't think will ever entirely go away, and you should know that. It is baked into me now. I will be angry about those 7 years when I am 90 years old and you are long dead." "I know," Cade said quietly. "And She stopped. Started again. "I can't keep punishing my sons for the thing you did. They want to be here. They are choosing this." She looked at him, and the anger was still there, and so was something else, something she had kept so far below the surface that it had almost convinced her it didn't exist. "I won't give you back what you destroyed. That's gone. But I might be able to build something different if you stop treating me like something fragile that needs to be waited for." Cade looked at her for a long time. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Whatever it is, I will not ask for more than you give." It was exactly the right thing to say. She suspected Jet had coached him. She suspected, and she found to her own irritation, that it didn't matter. "I need the documentation addressed. Formally, legally, through the High Tribunal. Not as a favor to me, as a statement of law." "Done. I need my camp to remain my camp. I will not be absorbed into this palace. My wolves answer to me." "Agreed. I need you to understand that if I ever have reason to doubt you again, if I ever find any shadow of the man who kicked my hand away in the rain, I will take my sons and my pack and burn the alliance to ash, and you will never find us." "Understood," Cade said. His voice was steady. "Completely." She nodded once, stood, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "I heard you," she said quietly, not looking back. "That night in the Savage Lands, after we left you there, I heard you make a vow." She felt him go very still behind her. 1,000 years, she said. "You said if it took 1,000 years." She turned just enough to see his face. His amber eyes were bright with something that was not grief exactly, but lived in the same country. You have been consistent, Cade," she paused. "I'm choosing to notice that." She walked out into the corridor. Behind her, she heard the quiet, rough sound of a man pressing his forehead to his hands, and then silence. She kept walking. But she was smiling. Not a wide smile, not a free smile, but a small, careful, beginning of something smile. And she allowed herself to have it for exactly the time it took to walk from the study door to the East Tower staircase. Then she packed it away and climbed the stairs and prepared to face the morning. Tomorrow, the documentation fight began. Tomorrow she would need to be the Ghost Alpha again. But tonight, just tonight, she let herself believe in the probability that her son had calculated, the one that wasn't 0. As High Chancellor Drevin received the summons to the throne room on a cold Thursday morning with the calm of a man who had received many such summons and survived them all, he was not prepared for the throne room to contain all 5 of them. Cade sat on the obsidian throne, dressed in formal black, his expression absolute. Standing at his right, as calm and still as she had been in the fog of the Savage Lands with a spear at her feet, was Lyra, wearing the gray mantle of the Ghost Alpha over the formal dark green of the Citadel's royal household. It was the first time she had worn the Citadel's colors. The statement was not subtle. Jet stood at his father's left, hands folded behind his back, watching Drevin with the expression of a chess player who had already finished the game. Khan stood at the base of the throne steps, arms crossed, a breathing wall of stone. And Rix was sitting on the arm of the throne, just perched there, casual, grinning, with the particular energy of a boy who had been told he could not sit on the throne and had found a loophole. Drevin stopped in the center of the chamber. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice as even as ever. "You called for me?" "I did," Cade said. "My sons wanted to meet you." Drevin looked at Jet. Jet looked back. He had the stillness of deep water, vast, calm, and giving away absolutely nothing about what moved beneath the surface. "Lord Castellan," Jet said, "I've reviewed the Blood Succession Act you cited before the Council. You were entirely correct. The princes do not currently satisfy the 3 conditions of formal succession." Drevin nodded carefully. Concern I raised only in the interest of—" "We satisfy 4 others, however," Jet continued. He produced a scroll, actual parchment, drafted, sealed, perfect, and held it out. An aide appeared from nowhere to take it to Drevin. Under the emergency succession provisions of the 307th year, heirs born under extraordinary circumstances may be retroactively registered by joint declaration of the reigning alpha and the birth parent, witnessed by no fewer than 3 council members and the High Tribunal. He tilted his head. "We have prepared the documentation. The witnesses have been secured. The tribunal hearing is scheduled for next week." Drevin unrolled the scroll. It was immaculate. Every clause was cited. Every precedent was footnoted. "Additionally," Jet continued, "I have identified 14 instances in the past 40 years where the Blood Succession Act you cited has been applied. In 12 of those instances, the application was made under advisement from High Chancellor Drevin." He paused. "In 9 of those 12 instances, the application was made within 30 days of a significant financial arrangement between your office and the affected noble family." He smiled pleasantly. "I thought you'd want to know that I found that, before someone else did." The chamber was so silent Drevin could hear his own heartbeat. He looked at the boy. 10 years old. Small feet that still didn't quite reach the floor when he sat. Eyes like molten coins, completely serene. "The documentation fight," Drevin said carefully, "will be expensive." "Yes," Jet agreed, "for whoever opposes it." He folded his hands. "Lord Castellan, I want to be clear. I have no interest in removing you from your position. You are extraordinarily good at it. The kingdom runs well when you are running it. I would like that to continue." He met Drevin's eyes without blinking. "Under the understanding that the kingdom's best interests and your personal financial interests are not the same thing, and that I will be watching to ensure they are never treated as if they are." Drevin looked at the boy for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he bowed. Not the perfunctory bow of a senior administrator acknowledging a child. A genuine bow. The bow of a man who recognized a superior adversary. "Of course, Your Highness," Drevin said. He backed out of the throne room with his dignity intact. Behind him, he heard Rix fall off the arm of the throne and land with a thump, followed by Lyra saying, "Rix," in the particular flat tone of a mother who was fighting very hard not to laugh. Drevin walked the length of the corridor and turned the corner and leaned against the wall for a moment. He had served 4 kings. He had a feeling about what the 5th would be like. He was, he discovered to his own surprise, not unhappy about it. The citadel slept. Every corridor was dark. Every hearth had burned down to embers. The guards walked their rounds with quiet boots, and the wind moved through the northern battlements with a low, lonely note, and the stars above the Iron Blood Kingdom were the sharpest they got in the deep cold of late autumn, each one a pin of silver light in a black field. Rix found the throne room by accident. He had been walking. He walked at night sometimes. When the hollow sound in the back of his mind got louder, when stillness became impossible, he had been padding through the lower quarters in half-wolf form, silent as smoke, when he saw the great doors standing slightly open. Just an inch. Just enough. He pushed through. The throne room was lit only by the moonlight that fell through the high windows in wide, pale bars, illuminating the stone floor in silver and shadow. The obsidian throne sat at the end of its dais like a sleeping giant, dark and cold and enormous. Rix walked to it slowly. He stood in front of it for a long time. Then he sat down. It was too big for him. His feet dangled. The stone was cold even through his clothes, and the carvings bit into his back, and it wasn't comfortable at all. It wasn't built to be comfortable, he realized. It was built to be imposing. To remind whoever sat in it, and whoever stood before it, that power had a physical weight. He sat with it anyway. He was sitting there, staring out at the empty hall, when he heard footsteps. Jet appeared in the doorway. He took one look at his brother, said nothing, and walked down the length of the hall to sit on the steps below the dais. They were quiet together for a while. Then the second set of footsteps, heavier, slower. Khan ducked through the doors, looked at the scene, and leaned against the base of the throne dais with his arms crossed and his eyes half closed. 3 boys. 1 throne. No words. The moonlight moved as the earth turned, painting new patterns across the stone floor. Rix pressed his thumb against the river stone Khan had given him last week. Just given it to him, wordlessly, pressed into his palm after dinner. The way Khan communicated everything important. And he felt the hollow sound in the back of his mind go quiet. He thought about what Felix had said. Finite. I can see all of you at once. That's comforting. He thought about his father alone in the study with all those open books. He thought about his mother's laugh. The real one, not the commander's one. The one that happened when she thought no one was listening. That sounded like something long locked up getting out into the air. He heard that laugh more lately. In the doorway, a shadow moved. Lyra stood in the opening, her gray mantle over her sleeping clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She had heard them. Of course she had. She could find any of them blindfolded in the dark of the Savage Lands, and stone walls were not the Savage Lands. She looked at them. 3 boys in the silver dark. Her 3 reasons for everything. Jet, with his father's eyes, running calculations she would never fully know the contents of. Khan, steady as stone, holding the world together at its seams. Rix, sitting on the throne like he was trying it on for size, not to claim it, just to know its weight. Something cracked open in her chest. Not the painful crack of the bond, not the fracture of old grief. Something else. Something softer and more complete. The feeling of a door opening that had been closed for so long you'd stop seeing it as a door. She stood in the doorway and let herself feel it, the warmth of them, the impossible, terrifying, beautiful fact of them, that she had made this, not on purpose, not with any plan for greatness, but only because she had kept breathing, one cold night at a time, and they had kept breathing with her, and somehow from all that survival they had grown into this. 3 princes who would reshape a kingdom. 3 boys who still needed their mother to be standing in the doorway. Her eyes filled, and she did not blink the tears away. She let them fall quietly in the dark where no one could see. Except Khan felt the slight shift in the air pressure. He turned his head toward the doorway, saw her there, said nothing, just extended one arm slightly from his side, a small, subtle motion that could mean anything, that meant, to anyone who knew him, everything. Come here. Lyra pushed off the doorframe and walked across the silver floor to her sons. She sat on the steps beside Jet. She leaned against Khan's shoulder. Rix immediately climbed down from the throne and deposited himself in her lap with the unselfconscious weight of a boy who did not care that he was too old for it and dared the universe to say otherwise. The 4 of them sat together in the cold and the moonlight, in the center of a kingdom that had tried to throw them away and failed, and the citadel breathed around them, old stone and older bones, and somewhere in the north tower a king lay awake staring at the ceiling, and the bond between him and the woman in the throne room glowed like an ember in the dark. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was a beginning,